Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome and good morning. I am actually going to hand the baton over to Trevor this morning in thinking about how to be positive and resilient in difficult situations and thinking through this idea of mindset. I think that came through quite strongly from Stello's sharing yesterday and the various comments is just thinking about how do we develop and how do we help others to develop a strong mindset and a positive, resilient mindset. And so what it reminded me of Trevor's story of his Dusi marathon through the flood waters. And Trevor always talks about working with metaphors. And I thought this would be a great story. We talk about stories, we talk about metaphors, and I thought this would be a great story and metaphor in terms of mindset. So Trevor, over to you.
So thank you. I hope I'm unmuted and everyone can see the screen. Can you? Good. So yes, Lee, I'm very much a simple thinker. I think in pictures. I'm very visual. And yes, metaphors all the time just spring to mind on almost everything that happens every day. So I'm just going to very quickly go through this. I'm going to try and be 10, maximum 15 minutes so others can get some questions in. This little picture here is of my rugby scrum half, and I was a fly half back in the mid-1970s. And for some reason, after a Saturday game, we'd go and socialize with a couple of mates who loved canoeing down the Umgani and the Duzi rivers. They loaned us a boat, so we decided to sit in it. And this was some 4 months later. I think this was in our first Duzi. For anyone that hasn't done the Duzi, it's about 120 kilometers of long distance. You tend to do this for about 70 kilometers over obstacles and hurdles. It's not a paddling race, it's almost a running race. So you're lucky if you get a quarter to a third for paddling purposes. This little pic here just reminded me, in fact, what I wanted to share here was when I first got started, the smaller guy tended to be in the front of the canoe and the taller guy tended to be in the back of the canoe. And this is how we set up for the first 3 years in this. And it reminded me that I was a follower in those early days. So I put all my faith into the guy who did the steering, and I was the engine room. So I got to understand what it takes to actually be an engine room behind a guy who's the driver of any particular concept. And you really learn that in the Duzi. So I hope over the course of this, you pick up 1 or 2 points and you want to come back and question me about how I apply those simple analogies and metaphors of following drivers and being an engine room in a concept is absolutely essential in business. So please remind me of whatever I say here. This as well, I just met my girlfriend at the time, was in the mid-70s. I think this was 1977. Some 4 months later, we were on the Duzi, and as you can see, the Duzi at that stage was all bush and dust roads, and you had to have seconds who met with you every 10 odd kilometers just to douse you down, because at the time of year, January, just outside of Pietermaritzburg, that sun was beating down. You needed liquids and there were no seconds. These seconds had to try and find us. This was a young 17-year-old girl who decided to actually follow me on that Duzi. Big mistake because we ended up getting married, so I'm not sticking around with that picture. That girl and I produced 2 little girls. The one standing up, UCT grad, and the one lying down is an attorney out of Tuckies. and that attorney out of Tuckies produced a little granddaughter for us, and Herman will be intrigued with this little picture. This was her doing 100th park run. She's actually four park runs short of 200. And now in lockdown, we probably won't do park run for about a year or 2 years. There on the left-hand side for Herman is Mark McClue, who is also a British whitewater kayaking champion in his younger days. My wife is she's about 3 park runs short of her 250. I just hit my 250 park runs about 4, 5, maybe 10 weeks ago, I think. And on the right-hand side is Mark McClue's protege, who wins most of the park runs out at Golden Harvest and Loneel and Lanseria direction. And for Herman, this is poignant because Viv Brown introduced me to Mark McClue some 20 odd years ago, and Mark McClue happened to be the first responder at the tragic killing of Viv Brown only about 5, 6 weeks ago. It just, life comes through at a flood. It comes through at a torrent. It's amazing. About 3 years after first getting involved in the Duzi with my scrum half, and at the same time, that young scrum half of mine was also my water polo colleague. We were playing Natal water polo. I should actually tell you that little story. In those Duzi valleys in those years, the mid-70s, it was very dangerous times. Those valleys, no one could get access to them, so we were taking our lives into our hands in those valleys. But at the same time, it was a 3-day race, and on a Thursday evening, we as a water polo club were playing to win the league. And my partner and I had to shoot out of the valley. It took us about an hour to get out, then about 45 minutes to get into Durban. I remember us playing DHS Old Boys to win the particular league. Shoot back, we got back at about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. And the first leg would go off at about 6 o'clock in the morning. So we only had a couple of hours sleep. And then on the Saturday evening after finishing, we were playing Transvaal. And so after a 3-day race, 120 kilometers, we were back in playing provincial water polo at the same time. So it was quite hectic in those days. But this particular photograph leads up to the shooting of the river in flood. This guy on my right-hand side was a water polo, well, he was my water polo mentor, 8 years older than me, used to introduce me to polo when I was a 14-year-old. After about mid-70s, I had a rugby practice, and it was raining, and all the rugby guys ran off to the change room and decided they were going for drinks. And I was pretty fit running around the field, and I noticed this guy running on the hockey field down below at Loy Park. So I shot down there, ran with him. He turned around and said, "No, man, we doing our final training for the Richmond Marathon from Richmond to Pietermaritzburg." And in that moment, he said, "Hey, come with us if you're doing nothing." So I went with him on the Sunday after playing rugby on the Saturday, ran the Richmond Marathon with him. I'd never run further than about 2.2 kilometers ever in any serious race. And 6 weeks later, we did our first comrades. This was 3 years later when my other young partner, he moved down to Cape Town. And I was running this, could have been my 3rd or 4th comrades now. And my partner was doing his green number. So he'd already started comrades. You can see his number is 997. There are about thousands of these guys now. And you can see our transistor radio in my right hand there. We were listening to the All Blacks playing South Africa in a test match, which people thought was unusual. I think we came in that day about 10:30. We had a nice social run. We're looking quite comfortable. He's looking tired. I think I'm looking comfortable in that leg. But that became the start of us paddling together. So he'd already done at that stage about 6 or 7 Duzis. His partner had gone somewhere else, and this is us right in the center. I think I can get you here. This is us here, right in the center of a Dusi in the really early days. This is probably about 1980, and it gives you an indication of the total field of the Dusi then, which was probably only about 100 boats at that stage. And you can see we used to call this mob here the fish and chips. And what you wanted to do was to get out of the fish and chips as quickly as possible so that you could get an open way. If you got stuck at the back there, you could be delayed by an hour to an hour and a half by the end of the Dusi. And what was quite interesting here, I noticed there were some guys playing around with helmets. You'll see in those days, no one had life jackets, no one had helmets, but it was pretty dangerous. People were dying on that river. And I'll show you where they were dying. But what stimulated Lee to actually ask me was when I brought this picture up for Herman, and I asked him, did you recognize that? This picture was of us about a year or two later on the front page of the Mercury or the Daily News. And it was of the 50-miler. And we happened to come across the line, the finish line first. But that was me casting a big shadow when I was talking to Oscar, and Lee came back and said, listen, tell us about the day that you won the Dusi. No, we didn't win the Dusi. We came across the finish line first. And the reason we came across the finish line first was quite a funny story. My partner had a shoe factory. I was busy working big time, and we had this race which started, it was a 2-day race, a warm-up for the Dusi. It started at about 2 o'clock, and we were still stuck in Pinetown at about 12:30, 1:45, and our leg was supposed to go off at 2. If anyone knows the distance from Pinetown down to the valley, you have to fly. So we quickly threw this double canoe onto the top of a combi, shot down Elviston Ridge, and we looked to our right, and there was an empty canoe overtaking the combi on the main highway. And we wondered whose canoe it was. It was ours. So we hadn't tied it down properly, and we were absolutely flying, and this thing came off the top. So we quickly put it on, shot down the road to the start. Luckily, the start had been delayed a little bit, but as we arrived there, they shot the gun, and everyone paddled off. So we stopped the combi, pulled the canoe off, raced down to the river, threw it in, and jumped into the canoe on the first leg. And as we started paddling, we went round in circles. What we hadn't noticed was that the rudder had been knocked off. But we decided, no, listen, we can't stop here. So we paddled that whole first leg without a rudder. And what that meant is that we were really at the back of the pack. And in those days, what they did is they took the back of the pack and had you start in the front for the next day, which was quite interesting because we were quite strong. We were pretty good social paddlers, and I'll tell you where we came in. And they allowed us to start the river, the Umgani River, came down in a flood overnight while we were in the valley. And they started us off an hour ahead of schedule, and all the big names went down to the first rapid called Tops Needles, a big rapid, and they all wanted to see how the fish and chips would cope, and we were pretty good. We were big river boys, so we knew what we were doing, and they watched our lines, and right at the bottom of this rapid, I was in the front, and I took a wrong line and ended on top of the biggest rock ever. In Tops Needle, and I could see the look of fright and fear on all of these big names, and they realized, no, there's no way anyone can shoot this thing. In the meantime, what my partner and I did, we sort of shimmied sideways across, and we dropped back in the river, and we stayed upright until we got to the next impenetrable rapid. This is again another shot of us first across the finish line. But what got us first to the finish line was shooting this rapid called Devil's Island. Now, you would have noticed Oscar on Tuesday when he said, hey, you boys shot this in flood. This is a category 5. It's like a category 5 hurricane in river terms. No one shoots this. And we were an hour ahead of all these guys, and we came through here, and all the top boys decided, no, they were going to run over Burma Road, which, if anyone's run Comrades, is about twice as steep as Polly Shorts. And I'll show you what Burma Road looks like just now. But as a result, I'll take you back to that. As a result of shooting this, we ended up at the finish line before they'd even put up the tents to welcome everybody in, because they had to get from the start of the second day to the end. But there was a photographer at this rapid, and we were the only boat ever to go over that in that particular flood. Graham Pope Ellis, who was the Bruce Fordyce of the Duzi, he took this particular photograph, and it became his wall mural in his canoe kayak shop in Pietermaritzburg. The story behind that is because we were so far ahead on the second day, we ended up an hour ahead of everyone else. The newspapers had a deadline. They thought we had won. They didn't stop to ask anyone, and they put us on the front page of both the Mercury and the Daily News, and said these were the top boys on the 50 miler. Well, it was wrong, but we've never told anyone that they were wrong. But being big river boys, you can see this is now 1987. This is about 7 years later, as we're getting towards the end of our relationship in the water. In fact, I just sold out my businesses down in Durban, and it got up to Joburg at this time. So I would just come down to shoot the Duzi. But you can see this was a weir. A couple of guys have died on weirs like this. And the reason that they die is when you shoot and you go underwater, you don't come back up. So people tend to stay away from the weirs. But because I knew what it was like to be in the engine room, and this guy was great as an engine room, I knew he could keep us up, and I had no fear in those days, and just took a line. And what would happen there is, in this particular race, they let off the singles before us, because when the river is high, the doubles could actually come back, and they'd like everyone to finish almost on a handicap type basis. You can see most people walked around these type of weirs, but as a result of us shooting these things, we would catch up 5 minutes on every single weir. And this was a little bit later down. In fact, this is where people have actually died when they go into those weirs. Another photographer caught us here, also 1987. This is us looking pretty good. And I hope you notice that in this, as a team, our paddles are absolutely in unison. The front guy driving, the engine room, but in total unison as a team. The engine room guy having complete faith in the driver in the front. This was also the Duzi of that year, where after the 50 mile it was in flood, the Duzi, there was no water. So we had to run over Burma Road. And if you look in the background there, a kilometer further down, this Burma Road is, as I say, twice as steep as Polly Shorts, and you'd have to carry this blooming canoe, which is now about 80 kgs to 100 kgs because it's got a ton of water, up this blooming hill, and you can see the legs were taking strain, they were pumped up. Don't anyone tell me I'm starting to get porky here, if Ian Johnson is on board. But we'll nail this. We flattened this Burma Road to get going. And then that little team, when I met with Mike Bengelu, my partner, as I say, he'd already done about 4, 5, 6 Duzis. He's now retired with 30 Duzis and 20 Comrades. But what that allowed our pairing to be, Mike and myself there, we became number 1 and number 2 in the Dusi Ironman. And to do that, you had to complete 10 Duzis, for which you got that green number, 10 comrades, for which you got that green number, and then you got this award, and it says the Dusi Canoe Marathon, Seals Mid-Mile and Comrades Marathon in the same year. That's just one of them. And if you go into the Dusi Awards, Mike, because he was ahead of us in time, is number 1 in perpetuity, and I'm number 2 in perpetuity in the Ironman Awards. Now, the interesting thing about that, when I was talking about Oscar, and I brought these pictures up, and we were listening, Oscar's the world champ and all that sort of thing. He was our junior in those days, playing water polo with us. He was on the river. And it's interesting to hear a guy's a world champ, but he never ever was able to do what we were doing here as social boys and complete comrades. And it's just different mindsets and how different people are positioned. We were very good social boys, and our mindset was, oh, we'll get into this water, and we tended to end up in the top 1% every race that we went. And that's what's led us to talking about, when you get involved in things, participate. And in your participation, just see how well you do, and see if you can become a top 1%. To me, you don't have to win ever. You don't have to be a world champion. That's reserved for me, for the Oscars of this world. We never had a mindset that we wanted to be world champs. Oscar did. From the beginning, he was flat out, and he did it, and we watched him actually do it, but we were playing as very good social boys. This is a 1989 picture when they reconstructed the weir. I started off with my young partner, how we walked over the weir. They reconstructed, and we were able to start shooting that weir, but I think this was my last Dusi. I probably did about 11 or 12 Duzis. What else have we got here?
Trevor,
I think that's it.
We are sort of heading towards the bottom of the hour, so I think we do need to.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So it's fantastic stories. What I'd like to ask you quickly, Trevor, before we just go around the group quickly for some comments, is so relate some of those metaphors quickly, or one or two of those metaphors quickly, to your business life, because I think that translates directly for us, and I think it's also a useful connection for people.
Okay, and quite simply, we live in the wild river of life, as far as I'm concerned. Obstacles get thrown at you, and it's better to work with folk in a team. And it's sometimes you've got to be a follower, sometimes you've got to be a driver. If you are the follower, then you've got to be the engine room, and you must put your back into driving that canoe as hard as you can, and you rely on your front man to actually be giving you the correct lines. The other thing is, when that river of life is absolutely in flood, as we were in that particular picture of shooting Devil's Island, Devil's Rapid, you have to be paddling faster than the flood water is going. Otherwise, the back of the canoe will be taken by the river in flood, and you'll be spun around, and that canoe will be broken. And that's what we have to do here. That's why I have this 20X. It's to remind me, you've got to be operating in lockdown 20 times faster and more effective, and especially in today's time, than most other people are operating, and that you were operating the previous year. That's what's happening in life right now. And as this lockdown crisis hit us, it was like this flood. And so we've been working flat out, and that's what the virtual trade fair is about. We've said over this lockdown period, we really are busy. What else is there? There are plenty of little metaphors that we can do. Sometimes the river of life is dry, and you've got to carry everything up the steepest of hills. And I'm talking about having done 10 comrades, 10 Duzis, Seals Ironman, and done all of those sort of things. But there are people here who are faster than me. There's Ian Johnson there. I've just had a look at him. Ian, I mean, he'd make us look like monkeys on the road. And I think Ian's done about 4, 5, 6 comrades or something to that effect. Viv Brown, who we're talking about 20 odd years ago, he was listening to the story and watching these pictures, and he was motivated to do comrades. And he did 14 comrades, Herman. He went out, he was just motivated by the storytelling. So the stories that you tell, people grab. And sometimes you never know. They get motivated by it, and they become they write their own life stories. And the last thing I just want to wrap up with there is I'm still a believer that this life is not about winners and losers. It's about achievers and non-achievers, people who participate as opposed to being spectators in sport. And sometimes if you participate and you participate long enough, you end up in the top 1% of whatever category of life you may be participating in. So I hope those are some stories that you might be able to take away from this.
Great, thanks, Trevor. Appreciate that. Herman, I'm not sure if you're still with us. It looks like he's just left. He said he unfortunately had to go off. All right, so I'd just like to really whip through the group quickly, just give everybody a chance to put in a comment or a thought or an idea that they've got out of Trevor's stories this morning. So Karina, let's start with you.
Just again, I mean, amazing achievements, just showing what can be done if you set your mind to it. So it was just, again, a confirmation how important mindset is. And as Trevor ended off there, instead of lying down now, is going twice as hard.
Great, thanks, Karina. Grant, good morning and welcome. You've walked into something maybe you weren't expecting, but I'd love to hear firstly, how you came to join the group and what your thoughts are on what you've heard so far.
Okay, well, Jasper invited me last night, so thank you, Jasper, for that. I've been working with Jasper for a year or so. No, thanks for the story. I think you're quite right in having to work faster, harder during this time. It plays into my hand quite nicely because online is my game. So I'm finding a lot more competition in my world, and I think the world's going to change into the future. I think 2 things. I've got an interview next week with the University of Stellenbosch, who are electrical, and I'm talking on automation. The one thing is that there is a change coming where there's going to be a push for more automation because humans were the weak link in the economy. And on the other side, there's going to be a push against automation because no one's got a job at the moment. So we're sitting in that sort of quandary at the moment. But thanks for the story, Trevor.
Great, thanks, Grant, and yeah, again, welcome on board. Ian, I'd like to pop across to you and see you put a few comments into the chat box, which is great. But yeah, just some thoughts from your side.
Yeah, thanks. I can you hear me? I just wrote down some things while you were talking, Trevor. It's a very interesting talk and really good pictures. And yeah, I actually wrote some. I'm trying to share them with the chat here. So I got to learn to lead through following. If you get stuck at the back, it could take you an hour. I thought that was a really interesting one because actually a lot of people in society do get stuck at the back. And I think some of the conversations we have to have is about how actually in our struggles to get to the front, sometimes we just disable others who stay at the back. I was chatting yesterday with Lee about whether life was really about competition or collaboration. But that's for another kind of conversation. And then there was a really interesting one where actually you crossed the line first by actually following a different route. So you were the winner, but you did it by, I don't want to say cheating, but you did it by starting at a different place, which is also quite a common sort of strategy for winning. And then I had, if you don't have any steering, you get stuck. Shoot where's to get ahead was a bit of a metaphor for daring to dream, daring to win. Shape your ship. I actually saw your boat was a very special shape, that the back was sort of more angled than the front in order to get through the troubles of the rapids, I thought was a really key kind of point, that you need to design your organization for the purpose that it's got. Expect to carry your boat. And I think that's a really big one, actually, that in the Duzi, you expected to carry your boat. So you designed it for that. You knew you were going to have to stop and get out the river and go up the hills. So you designed your ship for that. And then the last one I think was really nice, is sort of, to be good, you don't have to be a Superman. Be good, just keep on going, and you'll achieve what you want. I think that's the important bit. It's really that you were achieving what you wanted to achieve. You weren't trying to achieve what other people were wanting you to achieve. So you were happy to be as you call it, a good social player. So thanks a lot, Trevor. I really enjoyed that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ian. Some great points you picked up on there. Excellent input. Thank you very much. Jasper.
I don't have any hero stories, but in time to come, Trevor reminded me of some of my own experiences in Comrades and some of the humorous incidents that came out of it, but I'll share it at another time when we have more time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jasper. Ian. Ian Johnson.
I certainly don't have the sporting accolades that people like Trevor and Cecile have, but I do know, having run Comrades and done a bit of sport, that in order for Trevor to achieve what he did, and certainly for Cecile to achieve the heights that she has in sport, we talk about mindset, but it's all about commitment, and it's all about, you wake up in the morning sometimes and think, don't really feel like it. And it's overcoming that thought for a second that gets you back out there. So that's what makes people persistent and achieve those objectives, is that ability to overcome that initial negative mindset and that commitment and saying, well, I'm just going to do it. So that mindset, it tends to be a bit of an overplayed word, but when it comes to achieving what they've achieved, you can't do it without that commitment and that right mindset.
Great. Thanks, Ian. Cecile, your thoughts?
Just for the record, although I am good at many sports, I always think that anyone that runs the Comrades and swims or water polos is not lacquer in the head. Because when we lived in Natal, I used to think, oh my word, why would anyone run this road if you can drive it between Maritzburg and Durban? So that has definitely never been on my bucket list. Or my sense of achievement, but I want to say to Trevor that the strangest thing, if you do grow up in a sporty family, and a lot of people in this group are, then you don't actually think of those things as achievements while you are doing them. You just think of them as part of life. You don't think that it's difficult to go and train, or it's difficult to get to, like you were saying, you were shooting down in between your the Dusi, you were shooting down to go and play water polo matches. Other people at that time would think that you are crazy doing that, but it's just part of your makeup. It's not that you think, oh my word, I want to be special, I want to be bragged about, people must talk about me because I've done that. It just comes naturally, and then afterwards, when you think about it years later, you think, okay, I was okay. And I did this because it was just part of life. But lovely. I love the story. It was so fascinating. Great.
Thanks, Cecile. Lee, some final thoughts from your side.
Thanks, Trevor. Really appreciate it. I think you could see there are lots and lots of just little, as you say, it's a metaphor, and a metaphor can be what different people need in the moment. And you can draw from it what is important for you in the situation that you're in. And you literally put yourself in the boat. So I've never done anything like that. But you can still picture yourself through the pictures and through the story. And that's what I love about hearing people's stories and then connecting it to your own and what you can take and learn from it. So thanks so much for that. I would also like to now prompt Cecile and ask if you can share your story tomorrow. Your story of perhaps you talk about being a sporty family, and you talk about the various sports that you've been involved in and the levels of competition. And you talk about it as if, this was my normal life, but it would be really helpful in the same kind of vein as what Trevor has done is, what are some of the key learnings or the key principles or metaphors that we can gain from your story in terms of what does it take to really be a champion and achieve in the way that you have. So would that be all right for you to take that over tomorrow?
Depending on, because it's so lucky to see photographs that Trevor was sharing as well at the same time. So last night my son asked me to send him some photos when he played cricket at school, and on my computer where I was working I couldn't even find photographs, because in those days photos were in photo albums, not on a computer like it is right now. So depending on how busy I am today, I want to find some photographs, and I'll kind of like just dot down a few things. Then okay, I'll do that tomorrow. But if I don't get to do that, Lee, I will actually tell you before tomorrow morning. I didn't actually get to find photos or anything. Otherwise, it's just boring if you listen to a whole story. But it's so lucky to see some photos along the line.
Okay, no problem.
Thanks, Cecilia.
If there are no photographs, then you get dressed up in your old athletic clothes and you do a show and tell for us how you did your starts and your run. Yeah.
I was more looking for the martial arts outfit with the black belt and.
I've got that.
Okay, folks. Well, fantastic session again this morning. Thanks. Thanks for everybody joining us, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Have a great day. Cheers then.